Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Easier Said Than Done podcast. And I am so excited because today I've got Aline Lerner on the show. Now, Aline is someone that I've been following for a while, not just on social media, but through a fantastic platform, interviewing.io. I used interviewing.io back in the day when I was getting ready for the FANG interviews. And I dare say that was a while ago. So, it was probably quite a different product back then. But I'm so excited to have Aline on the show because of all the people out there who talk about, how to get into big tech or how to get into tech generally. Aline's the real deal because not only is she an engineer by background, she's moved into the recruitment space, but she uses data. And if you guys haven't checked out the interviewing.io blog, I recommend you do it. Just paying attention to that blog will help you extract the 10% signal you need for the 100% noise out there in the world to let you know. So you can go about Aline stuff. So Aline, thank you for your time. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. What an amazing intro.
Well, it's all true. This is the benefit from having actually followed you for years and years and years, and appreciate everything you do. Is it's effortless to give you the introduction I think that you deserve. I probably underbaked it as well, to be honest, because just the amount of value out of your blog and your platform is tremendous. So I will, of course, for those of you excited to connect with Aline, put Aline's LinkedIn in the show notes. But I did do a very, very quick overview, but I think everyone would love to hear from you. You've got one heck of a story. You've been around the traps a while. You've got some real experience. You started well before the world became so tech heavy and influencer heavy, which means you were grounded in reality, the world before Instagram, which is a valuable grounding. Take us through your journey. Take us through, who you are and how you came to be where you are today.
Welcome to Easier Said Than Done with me, Zubin Pratap, where I share with you the tens of thousands of dollars worth of self-development that I did on my journey from 37-year-old lawyer to professional software engineer. The goal of this podcast is to show you how to actually do those things that are easier said than done.
Thanks. I would love to. So it's a nice way of calling me old, but that's okay because I am. So one thing that a lot of people actually don't know about me that's a fun little tidbit is, I went to MIT for undergrad, but then I took a bit of a left turn and worked as a cook for 3 years. And I only really mention that. Well, I'm proud of it, but I also mention it because hiring in professional kitchens is so different than hiring in the corporate world. You basically show up in the morning and, you bring your knives. They invite you to show up, but like once you show up, you bring your knives and they show you how to set up the station and they show you the dishes and then you just work, right? They watch you chop stuff, they watch you prep. And then when service starts, they watch you put up the dishes. And then at the end of the night, if you did well, they offer you a job. And if you didn't, maybe they feed you and send you home. Sometimes they don't feed you. It depends on how poorly you did, I suppose. But I just thought that was amazing. And, I didn't make that my career. I wasn't that good at it, frankly. But I went back to engineering. And, when I re-entered like real work, I was really surprised by how hiring happened. And I was really frustrated by it. I remember at the company where I spent much of my engineering career, we had a guy who worked with me refer one of his high school friends. And the guy who made the referral looked great on paper. His high school friend did not. In fact, I think he had dropped out of college and maybe he did community college for a little bit. And then I think he dropped out of that. I don't remember the details. It wasn't a resume that a recruiter would probably love. But the two of them had spent, years coding together and writing games. So the guy doing the referral had a really good idea of what this candidate could do. And I remember there was so much resistance to even interviewing him because he didn't finish college. And that was just such a turning point for me. So I ended up kind of falling into recruiting because I just kept noticing these things that irked me. And I was also surprised that many recruiters weren't technical. Like I thought technical recruiter didn't mean recruiter who hires engineers. I thought it meant a recruiter who is technical.
Yeah.
And I realized, no, that's not the case. So I thought, maybe I can do something cool here. I think there's an opportunity. It's clearly broken. So I worked as a recruiter for a few years to kind of learn what they do and understand why it's hard. I ran recruiting at a couple companies. Udacity is the one you probably would have heard of. Then I started my own recruiting business. And then as I started that, I also noticed that many of my clients would not engage with candidates unless they looked a certain way on paper, even though, I had started interviewing my own candidates, right? Because I'm like, if I'm going to put my name, stamp you with my name, I want to make sure you're good. And while I was doing this one, I learned that companies don't care about interview results. They didn't care what I thought, which kind of makes sense. Who cares what I think? But what was even more interesting is that candidates really appreciated being able to get feedback during an interview. So that's where the idea for interviewing IO came from. It's like, it seems like engineers want to practice. There's so much information asymmetry out there. They don't know what to expect in interviews. They very rarely get feedback in the wild. And I thought, how can we trick companies into talking to the people they should be talking to rather than the people they think they should be talking to? So what if we do practice interviews? We'll make them anonymous. And then if people are top performers, we'll make companies talk to them anonymously as well. That's where the idea came from. I've been at this now for, well, interviewing IO I've been at for a decade, recruiting and
Yes.
engineering even longer than that. But the sad to say, like, in some ways, the world today is even worse than the world was in 2015 when the company started. And I can rant about how like AI is great, but it's also terrible and it's ruining hiring. And we can get to that. But
Sure.
a lot of the same problems persist today. So we're still at it, trying to chip away at this giant beast and trying to make hiring efficient and meritocratic and fair.
Yeah, so a couple of questions now. Just going back to the cooking era, you mentioned how it was an amazing thing to watch, how they were hiring, And now obviously you'd get thrown out of the building if you came to a tech interview with hot knives. That's understandable. But, could you contrast the features of what you observed in that, in the chef environment selection process and the tech interview selection process to give listeners a sense of why that was amazing, whereas the tech one isn't, and let's analyze why that is the case.
Yeah. So there are some similarities and some differences. I think both processes started with a resume, but there wasn't really the same obsession with name brands in the culinary world. I think that as long as you looked like you had experience doing the thing you were supposed to do, you would probably get an interview.
Right.
And, you said some really nice things about our blog. One of the studies we published that to me was at once a source of a lot of pride, but also very frustrating to see the results, is a study where we had recruiters look at resumes and try to figure out which candidates they should interview. And they were terrible at this task. I think that they were only slightly better than a coin flip. And we can, if you don't mind, we can maybe put the link in the show notes. But the other thing that was wild is, then we tried to figure out, well, what do resumes of the candidates that recruiters want to talk to have in common? And it was just name brands. It was just name brand bingo, right? So they looked at resumes for like, oh, that's not quite the right one. Let me
Saw that the right one.
that I
I
have
did-
so many angry posts. Let me find that one second.
Is this the one that's why your resume is bad, how to fix it?
Nope.
I've got to say, the one that's on the screen, the snake oil one, absolutely resonated with me. In fact, that's what prompted this podcast, because I'm like, okay, it's time. I have to reach out to Aline. Like, the data is clear. I've been saying this for years to my students. And if you do find the other one, absolutely let me
I
know.
just dropped it in the chat, so you can put that one. But I can segue into talking about this one as well, because there's the findings from that one kind of inspired the snake oil one. So basically, we saw recruiters are looking at resumes for like a median of around 30 seconds. And in that time, they're basically just looking for name brands. Kitchens, not really the case. One kind of fun parallel between the cooking world and the tech world is culinary school is kind of a scam in the same way that coding boot camps are a scam. Like, that was really cool to see. Like, I almost went to culinary school because I didn't know. And then this chef that I worked for was very kind and just said, like, look, you're just going to go into debt. And then when you graduate, you're going to be paid the same as somebody that just walked in off the street. And in fact, you'll probably get fewer interviews because it's a negative signal, because it means that you're like precious and you think you're like, you don't have the knife skills, but you want to like influence the menu and it's annoying. And I think boot camps are kind of similar. In fact, I think a semester at culinary school at the time was like the same as a semester at MIT. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Except when you graduate from culinary school, you get paid like $11 an hour. Well, back in, maybe it's a little more now. But so one of the other big differences is in culinary interviews, you're just doing the job, right? And at most companies, you can't just bring in a bunch of engineers and have them build features. I think that the setup costs for that are prohibitive and it's a distraction and it's not the same. There's a reason why companies don't do it. Instead, right? Many companies have you do these toy problems, which I have a lot of mixed feelings about, but I think there's just this honesty and just, can you do the job? We don't care who you are. If you have the experience, come in, try to do the job. You do the job, you get the job. And I wish we could do more of that in tech.
Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge, and I share the bootcamp skepticism. So what people don't realize is, when I was a 36, 37-year-old lawyer at this point in time in 2018, and I came to San Francisco. I borrowed a huge amount of like $50,000 against my mortgage, left my family here, went to San Francisco for a top-rated boot camp, and I quit after the first week. And I talked about it quite publicly in some of my podcasts. And I quit after the first week.
I
Then
didn't
I
know
thought,
that about you. That's wild.
yeah, so because I was that committed, like I was leaving the law, my startup had failed, I'd lost so much money in the startup, and I'm like, I could go back to the world that I'm safe in, and lick my wounds, or I could continue down this path and see where it takes me and believe that eventually I'm going to make it. And by this time, I'd been trying to learn to code on and off like everybody else, jumping around 3 to 4, years by this time. So I went to the boot camp. San Francisco's so expensive back then, it still is.
Still
And
is.
it got me an arm and a leg. And I was at the boot camp and I looked around and I said, none of these guys have actually been on the hiring side. None of these folks, I looked around at them and said, none of them actually understand how hiring works or how the real world works.
Hey, hope you're enjoying this episode. Listen, I bet you're tired of the social media BS, you're confused and overwhelmed, and all you want is for someone to just show you a clear path to a coding career, right? We get it. My partner Brian and I, we changed to code in our 30s, and we can help you do it too. Brian and I have done all sorts of engineering work from startups to Google, and now we've built an exclusive private mentorship program designed to get you from beginner to professional developer. Whether you've done a coding bootcamp, you have a computer science degree, or you're starting from zero, it doesn't matter. We'll build you a step-by-step and customized plan, not just for the coding stuff, but for the entire career change process. Look, I'll be honest, the program is not easy and it's not short. But if you do the work, you'll get results that will change your life, if that's what you want. So go to parsity.io/innercircle or find any of the links in the show notes, and you can schedule a free call with us. Speak to you then.
And I was at the boot camp and I looked around and I said, none of these guys have actually been on the hiring side. None of these folks, I looked around at them and said, none of them actually understand how hiring works or how the real world works. And they think shoving a bunch of theory down my throat or, a bunch of really rushed coding exercises is going to make me a programmer. Like there's a big difference between literacy and skill, and I'm not going to get skill in 3 months. And so I quit. I lost a bit of money and I came back after the first week and I got myself taught myself here. And that's why the program that I run with my partner, Brian, we call it the anti-boot camp, because there's a whole segment of people out there who are older, who can't leave work, who've got kids, who've got a busy schedule, and they have these ridiculous expectations about what's possible, and how they can earn 150K straight up. And I'm like, no, this is going to take longer than you realize. And so we do the private coaching thing where we if you're thinking you're going to do this in 3 to 6 months, you're wrong. Don't join us. This is a long walk because you're doing it part-time, and even then your risks are very high.
If you were doing it full-time, it would still be a long walk. I think that the
Absolutely.
propaganda that all these boot camps spewed really harmed the industry, right?
Very harmful and harm futures. Like there were so many people who tried and quit for the wrong reasons, where all the reason they quit was because they had the wrong expectations of the process and weren't prepared for that journey, and it's just tragic. So, which is why I really like your sort of no nonsense, complete honest truth approach to it. And as much of the world will rail against the fact that, if I don't, I don't have a big brand name. I mean, the reality was I kind of didn't as well, but I moved to Google and even before that. But I had to choose a strategy very different. I did not go for the big brands. I rode my bicycle around Melbourne looking for the software agencies and jobs and dev shops that nobody else wanted to work at, that had high churn. Because I figured they needed the people, I needed the opportunity. They had churn, they needed to take a risk on someone to fill the seat, and they were going to take a risk on me. And so that's how I found my first opportunities. People who couldn't find other talent, I went there, and I became a software engineer for a while, right?
I mean, that's the way. That's the way. When I started cooking, I didn't know anything. I went to some like raw vegan restaurant that has since become a source of scandal. That's a whole other story, but. I was like, okay, I'm just going to go work in this place. I'm not a raw vegan, but I'm going to learn how to chop vegetables and I'm going to work for free. And you got to do that. Actually, as you were talking about law school, I think one of the sad things is like there's kind of this continuum of no credentialing to full credentialing, right? And law is such an established industry. And it sucks that I think software engineering is sort of headed in the same place. Like I really want our industry to be meritocratic. You have some experience, you walk in off the street, you can do it, do the job. You shouldn't have to attend one of 3 law schools to be able to get a job and to ever have a chance of working in a decent firm.
Right.
And yeah, I
Yeah,
hope
which
that
you
we'll see some of that change in my lifetime.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So, I mean, and obviously my hiring is limited to, my very small corner of the world and my limited experience. And, I'm proud to say we don't sort of go by the credentialing system. Obviously it helps. And the way I try to explain it to students is when they don't know anything about you, some information that rules you out is more valuable than information that may rule you in, because it's kind of harder to rule you in. And ultimately, like you look at these DSA processes, the data structures and algorithm stuff, it's not really measuring programming skill. And I think anyone who thinks it is making a mistake of, misunderstanding what programming. It's really a filter to say, should we be talking to you further?
Yeah. Mhm.
That's kind of it. Do you have the cognitive ability or the basic understanding that it makes sense to try and rule you in for the next round? It's a filter. It's not really an examination of skill in that sense. So let me
And
ask you.
I'm okay with these interviews. I think that they've gotten a little bit theatrical and like commoditized, but like my biggest problem isn't with the interviews, it's with everything that happens before you get the interview. Like I wish anybody could, have a chance to like show what they can do. And the fact is that the people that even get to like go through the gauntlet these days
Yeah.
be much more credentialed in this market, and with the advent of some of the AI screening tools that we're seeing.
And so, given you hold these very strong experience and experience-based and empirical views, Aline, if you were sort of survey in the last 10 years of doing interviewing at IO, with all your recruiting experience, what have you learned? Like, I think you guys on interviewing.io have done 200,000 mock interviews. Like, there's a ton of stuff you've got there. So, can you give us an overview of what you've learned, what you observed, your hypothesis, and how you try to solve it with interviewing.io and everything else you do?
Yes, some of it is going to be like a precursor to the interview and a little more about job search mistakes. Some of it will be about the interviews themselves.
Yeah.
I think probably the biggest mistake that I've seen candidates make is not postponing their interviews when they're not ready. And I know that has nothing to do with mock interviews or interview practice, but the reason we know this is we often have candidates. So we have a bunch of different offerings, and one of our offerings is something called dedicated coaching. It is the crown jewel, I think, in our suite of products. It's amazing. Like if you want a specific job title, you can just say, I want to practice with the person who has this job right now at the company that I want. They're going to assess where I'm at. They know exactly what the interviews are like. And then they're going to work with me to systematically fill in the gaps in my knowledge. Of course, they're not going to like give away questions. It's not like gross, but it's like, hey, you need to have this foundation. You need to know these things, and I'm going to help you figure out. I think with it, interview practice, it's not just like drilling on stuff. You don't know what you don't know. So the reason I mention all of this is we often have our users come to us and say, well, my interview with Meta is in 3 days. Get me a coaching package. And we're like, well, why are you doing this now? We can try. Sometimes we can pull that off, but like, that's not a good idea. And then we say, do you know that you can actually email them and say, hey, I need some time to prepare. And most candidates don't know that. And then they're terrified that if they actually try to ask for more time, the interview is going to get taken away from them. But the reality is that except for like 2022, where we saw a bunch of hiring freezes, it's a black swan event. That doesn't really happen. These companies are hiring all the time.
Hi, if you want a no BS insight into how to change your career, whether to code or something else, and how to actually get job opportunities in tech, then please subscribe and like. It's no BS because I have zero incentive to mislead you. I just want to help you and give you tons of value so that you will consider working with me to get to your next career. Take a look at the description text below to learn more about the training I offer. But I do post content here regularly, and by subscribing and liking and hitting that notification bell, you will get to know when I post new industry insights for you. You'll also know within about 3 seconds if you want to learn more, but at least you won't miss out. Oh, and please follow me on LinkedIn too. I pretty much post there every single day. Just look for my name, Zubin Pratap. All right, so please like and subscribe to this channel, and let's get back to the episode.
field.
But the reality is that except for like 2022, where we saw a bunch of hiring freezes, it's a black swan event. That doesn't really happen. These companies are hiring all the time. Recruiters, of course, are going to apply pressure because they get rewarded for putting butts in seats, and it's their job to apply pressure. But if you push back and you're like, look, I just want to put my best foot forward, I want to be prepared, they will be okay with it. Some exceptions, like if you're talking to a really small company and they literally have one open headcount and they need to fill it, they're going to fill it without you. But you can get a feel for that and ask some questions, which brings me to the second biggest mistake, which is for some reason candidates are scared to ask recruiters questions, or whoever their contact point is. Like, ask what's going to be covered in the interview. A lot of our users are like, it's a technical interview. Okay, great. Especially at smaller companies where there isn't a stand. We know processes for like 50 different companies like that, but some of them are not on our list. They're like, well, it's a technical interview. Well, okay. Is it going to be system design? Is it going to be algorithmic? Is it going to be a code review? Is it? I don't know. Like, well, you can ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So those are the big mistakes. There are a lot of negotiation mistakes that people make that I won't get into here because I can probably talk about that for like 2 hours. But I would love it if we could link to a blog post about the mistakes people make. And most of them are before you negotiate. Basically, you shouldn't tell recruiters anything. You should ask them all the questions, but don't answer their questions. Like this, I can actually drop the.
That's all right. I'll find it. Or if you have it, if you know exactly.
Got it. Okay, so please read that. And if you're interviewing with Meta, like if you do nothing else, just please read this blog post. Please, please, please. So negotiation aside, when it comes to the actual interview, I think people are generally underprepared, and I think they underestimate the value of practice, or they're too scared to actually start practicing because they know they're going to fail their first few interviews. One of the when you think about it, it's not that surprising, but senior engineers actually do worse in their first mock interview on our platform than juniors by a lot, because chances are juniors just did an algorithms class or they've been drilling. When you've been in the workforce for years, you're not doing this stuff unless you have a very specific kind of job. And I think people often stay in jobs they hate for a really long time just because they're dreading having to do these interviews.
Yeah.
So I think just like practice, it's not that bad. Everybody fails.
Oh, yeah.
I want to say about a quarter or a third of like the very top performers on our platform fail their first interview. It's just
100%.
Yeah.
When I was leaving Google, I've been very public about this. I failed my first 2 or 3 because I was just not warmed up. I just did. And also they were looking for very different things, and I'd gotten into the Google way of doing things and all that. And pretty much everyone I knew who was leaving Google at the time, and people who, a year after that got made redundant, all the engineers I knew didn't do so well in their first couple of interviews as they got warmed up again because they hadn't done it for 2 or 3 years, and they didn't practice properly. They needed some warm up rounds, and that's fine. Like, the odds are, I keep telling my students this, I said the odds are if you take one interview, the odds are always significantly against you.
Mhm.
The more interviews, it's like flipping a coin. The better your odds get, and the better you get at handling it, and the more warmed up you get, and that's okay. That's just normal.
I think on average, depending on the candidate, I mean, it's different, but across all of our users, it takes anywhere from like 5 to 10 interviews to start consistently passing.
For sure.
And that's very self-serving to say because we sell mock interviews, but we also have free mock interviews on our platform. We have like peer-to-peer, which are surprisingly good.
Yeah.
And I don't care, you do those, right? Don't give us a dime, but if you're going to interview for real, like but like there's this saying where if you're trying to get a message across to a group of people, repeat it like 3 times and then repeat it like 3 more times, and then maybe like, and I think interviews are the same way, where just over budget, not financially necessarily, just in terms of time investment.
Yeah. Well, I think that's exactly what I keep telling my students exactly what you say about, know the kind of interview, because I'm like, depending on how you slice it, there are about 9 to 14 different types of interviewing processes and flavors to this. And you have to know which game you're appearing to, because if you, turn up to a billiards game thinking you're going to play, pool, you're going to be in trouble. It may look the same, but it's not. It's actually quite different. And likewise with interviewing, I tell my mentees, what we try to get them to is between 2 to 3 interviews per month. And then I'm like, and that's a 3-month process. If you can maintain that run rate, then you're doing fine because you need that level of velocity. But to get 2 to 3 interviews a month when you don't come from a no-name brand, or when you come from a no-name sort of background, you don't have the big brand, is extraordinarily hard to do. And to do that, you need to build your credibility and signal in the market. And even then, a lot of people are going to say, like, you don't have the big brand behind you, or you don't have the big college behind you.
That
But,
actually reminds me of another mistake and ties back to resumes and credentialing a little bit. I think so many people agonize over what their resume looks like fonts and, layouts and whatever. And the reality is that if you have big brands on your resume, or in some cases niche skills, like if you have machine learning experience, just make sure that's really visible to recruiters. That's all you
Yeah.
need to do. If you don't have those things, don't spend time on your resume because it's not going to get you in the door. And then just put all your effort into outreach instead. And outreach
You
sucks.
said that I think you said that in this blog.
Yeah.
Right? Spot on. So inspired by that, I put a LinkedIn post. Aline, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I put a LinkedIn post out there, and I think I tagged you on it as well. And even now, it was half and half. About 50% of people thought that optimizing your resume would keep improving. And I phrased it very clearly. I'm like, at some point in time, is optimizing your resume kind of pointless versus getting out there and doing outreach? 50% of people thought the resume is the answer. Yeah, because
Yeah,
it's
we
suited.
say that a lot. And I think it's not helped by the fact that when recruiters do resume reviews, they're like, oh, you need this skill. It's about skills. But when they say skills, it's actually code for brands. And that sucks. And it takes time to figure that out. Like we've worked with many recruiters in the past who've hired through us, and they're like, part of the reason we've always insisted that hiring be anonymous is because recruiters will start saying, oh, your candidates don't have the skills we're looking for. Well, which skills? Oh, you mean brands. Sorry, that's what you mean by skills. So it sucks. I'm trying to think of like mistakes people make when it comes to the actual technical interview. I think one of the biggest ones is trying to memorize. I mean, I think memorizing questions will get you through phone screens.
Yeah.
Probably, especially at companies where you can find the list of questions. Yes, if you memorize all of those, you will probably get through the phone screen.
Yeah.
But you will not do well in the on-site if you don't understand. And in fact, that was one of the main drivers for writing a sequel to cracking the coding interview, because the original CTCI was huge. But at the end of the day, it's a list of problems and questions.
Correct.
And you need more. You need more in this market. You need more.
1,000%. And I've been on a podcast where I had the original cracking the coding interview, and I said, to be honest, I didn't really go through it because I found that what we needed to do in the market that I was in was quite, was a few notches above that. So, and we will talk about your work on Beyond cracking the coding interview. Question for you though, because having been on the hiring side, I have a view on this. And that is, how hard is it to? If you were to try to get candidates to empathize with how hard it is to actually go through 600 resumes, right? And to think about that when they're trying to apply, what would your advice be to them?
Do outreach. Like it's a losing battle. At the top of our discussion, I kind of alluded to AI being harmful. And one of the main ways that I think AI is amazing, right? I use all sorts of things every day to make me better at my job. But when it comes to hiring, I think it's being used in the worst ways to perpetuate the status quo. So what I've been seeing, and this is not all companies, large companies, I think one of the misconceptions is there's some kind of like ATS filter you have to get through. And at many large companies, it's just people looking at resumes. But ironically, at some smaller companies where there's less oversight, right, and less worry about compliance, they are using AI tools to potentially stack rank candidates. And what they look for is, before it was, you could maybe like search the PDFs for specific skills, but now you can dig your heels in and say, show me candidates who have worked at FANG or FANG adjacent companies, who have been on this specific team, who have had this many promotions in this many years. And it's idiotic because these smaller companies are not getting these candidates applying. But they just think that if we can just filter this pool of people better and better and better, we're going to make these hires. And what ends up happening is that you take all your existing biases, which, we've done analysis, where you worked matters a little bit. Not that much. Not that much. That's
Really?
not a big thing. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When we looked at the resumes of our and LinkedIn's of our users and tried to see which attributes were the most predictive of strong interview performance, surprisingly, it was doing a lot of MOOCs, like not just, having certifications, but actually like listing you. I've taken all of these classes. Like, so if you've done a lot of computer science classes on Udacity and Coursera and you're serious about it, that's generally a much stronger predictor than having worked at a thing. Another one was like not having typos on your resume was a stronger predictor than where you worked.
Aline, can I just interrupt, right? Just on the question of the MOOCs one, didn't you have a blog that also said that listing a bunch of certifications?
Yeah.
No.
Yes. So what I'm referring to isn't necessarily certifications, but like some people will just list the courses that they've done. And that's a little bit different. I also think some certifications are created differently than others. I remember the Triple Byte certification, if you remember them, was actually like a positive signal. And they were one of our big competitors. So it pained me to admit it, but we admitted it. They did a really good job of vetting candidates. But the problem isn't even necessarily with the certifications themselves. It's that the candidates who list certifications, not just courses, but certifications, tend to be candidates that don't have other things. And there is some correlation between never having worked at a good company and not being as strong. But I think that it's certainly like AWS certifications, A plus, like all of those are garbage. A lot of and I used to work at Udacity, but like a lot of their like career boosting certificate, like they used to teach students and then they changed to like doing ongoing learning. Like those are not very good. But what ends up happening when you list certifications is recruiters start looking at them and they're like, oh, this person is listing all this stuff. It means they don't have anything else. So even if the certifications are good, it actually ends up perpetuating yet another bias.
Yeah, 100%. So, and this is why I tell folks, guys out there, please keep reading the Intrigue.io blog, because you're going to get so much data-driven insight that is counterintuitive. And these are the potholes that you need to try and avoid, or the flaws in thinking that seem obvious enough, but aren't, and could be quite harmful to your effort to get into it, whether it's a top tech company or any tech company. Understand how human beings work. Psychology does interplay with this. So, Aline, question for you now. You are working on or have built the AI interviewer. Would you want to tell us about that? And given your mixed feelings about AI's impact on the human behavior and recruiting, what's your vision here? What's your hypothesis here? And what have you done?
Well, so first, I don't think that AI interviewers are going to replace human interviewers anytime soon, not just because they're not as good as a good engaged human, but because everyone's so obsessed with making vetting more efficient and they forget that hiring is about selling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So much of getting to talk to a human and a peer and another engineer in the interview process is like learning what they're working on and learning what kinds of people work at this company and what they value, not, the corporate value sense of the word, but engineering values. Like, is it more pragmatic? Is it more, hacky? And that's, different people want different things. So I think that the best engineers, even in this market, are just not going to be okay with doing completely asynchronous assessments. I think they're going to want to talk to a human, and smart companies will let them because that's a selling vehicle.
So let's just context for the folks a little bit. When you say an AI interviewer, what are you envisioning, or what comes to mind?
Yeah, I think it's a great practice tool, and that's where we're putting some of our effort right now. We did this as part of writing the book, but we also had a version of it before we started the book. I think that so much of asynchronous practice these days is lead code. And people are and lead code is a wonderful tool. Like, I mean, anybody that's preparing for these interviews should spend some time on lead code. Like, it's silly not to. But I think people overuse it and they grind way past the point of diminishing returns. And they also get really, really used to having test cases written for them and having something evaluate their code. So when we built our AI interviewer, which we're trying to make it like a midpoint between lead code and a good human, and I think we've gotten there. And now our AI interviewer has every problem from beyond cracking the coding interview, and it's free. And I would love to share that link. Like, anybody can just go out reading the book. But when we shipped it originally, our intent was, let's have something that feels like a human saying interviewer. So the AI interviewer will ask you to explain your thought process. It will ask you follow-up questions. You're going to have a discussion before you ever write code. Maybe then you implement a brute force solution. It'll ask you, if you can optimize it. It'll mirror the steps of company technical phone screen. And when we first shipped it, users were irate that it didn't provide test cases for them. And it was like a fun UX puzzle for us to solve. And we changed it from practice with AI interviewer to interview now, and making some of those copy changes and then just saying at the beginning, this isn't leak code. This is meant to really
How interesting. Again, yeah. So the expectation was more, hey, this is more like a lead code, as opposed to you like, no, this is a simulation of a real world interview.
Every other piece of feedback I got was, where are my fucking test cases?
Yes.
And it was legitimate, because people had a certain expectation based on other AI interviewers they had seen, but we're trying so hard to get away from that and to have people practice explaining their thought process and to write code and want to ask questions.
And I want to tell people, this is what Aline's saying here is so important, folks, because a lot of people think that just practicing on lead code is a simulation of the interview process. And I can tell you now, having done this so many times and having interviewed so many people, there's a huge jump between what you do from the comfort of your study and armchair on lead code and what you have to do in an interview process. In fact, the best way to illustrate this was, I can't remember who it was. There was I think some competitive bodybuilder or something, who said that he had spent 2 years training in front of the mirror doing his squats or his lifts. And on game day, on show day, he had to face the audience. And that completely threw him off, because he didn't have the visual feedback. And he's like, I didn't do a great job. My form was not great. And so the next year he didn't do well. And the next year he spent practicing without looking at the mirror, right? And the reason I'm giving this example, Aline, and for the others, is you have to use the AI interviewer to practice how you would go in a real human kind of interaction, not just how you would go lead code, because there is another step past lead code, which is your cognitive state during an interview, your interactive index during the interview. When I interview, I'm always looking for people who show they're collaborative, as opposed to people who are just like, yeah, I can do that, this crank out stuff quietly. I'm looking to know how you think, how you involve me, the kind of questions you ask. Are you happy to admit that you're not quite sure about something and you'd like something? But because that's a signal to me, because then I can trust that you will ask for help and you need it. And I'm happy. My job as an interviewer is to help you do well, not screw you over, not try and cancel you out in any way. My job is to say, hey, can you do this job? And I'm going to help you try and show you can.
My favorite quote about interviews is that it's a collaborative exercise meant to see if we can be smart together.
If you're a good interviewer, that's
you're a good interviewer. And we talked earlier about how the technical interview format gets a lot of flack, and I said I have mixed feelings about it. I think the biggest reason we get so much vitriol is because interviewers are bad, and that's a whole other can of worms. But there's so many interviewers that are not engaged. That yeah.
And I've never seen any company properly incentivize good interviewing. They train for it, but they don't incentivize it. There's no content.
Yeah, we spent a year coming up with the right metrics to track, because our livelihood as a business depends on having the best interviewers. There are a lot of other mock interview sites now. We were the first, but now there's a ton. And our MO is our interviewers are the most senior, they're the best, but then we have to walk the walk. So we track engagement and calibration and all of these other things, because we are financially incentivized to do that, and we throttle out bad interviewers. I wish companies, I've published, I'm like, hey, these are the metrics. Here's how you do it. Anybody can do this. We figured it out. You have to make some adjustments for real interviews, but you can do it. And I've only seen companies track stuff where it comes from the top, and there's some kind of engineering leader that is just passionate about interviews. And you find those people sometimes, and they get into the ATS, and they're like, okay, close rates on this and this, and then downstream, upstream, and they get into it. And it's so rare. Most candidates don't know which of their interviewers are scaring candidates away, which of their interviewers are too strict, are too lenient.
Yeah. I've seen this at Google as well, and I've told people, I said I've shadowed interviews when I was training for interviewing in the Google way, and I've shadowed interviews, and I'm like, there is no way I would have got through if this person was interviewing me. They're way too hard, way too pedantic. Or the bar is not, can you do the role? The bar is, can you do what I can do? which is not the bar for hiring. This is not a do you know what I know? It should be a can you do this role effectively, as opposed to doing what I can do. But no, a lot of interviewers do that, and then frankly, a lot of interviewers don't like taking the time out. For them, it's an interruption, it's a burden, and that influences their psychology during the interview, their attitude during the interview.
You're not engaged. Like you're not going to get good signal. You're not going to get the candidate's best work.
Yeah.
And you're not going to sell. Like you've done, like, it's probably better to just not do anything at that point. At that point, it's probably better to send them to an asynchronous AI.
Exactly. So look, I'm really looking forward to having the link and sharing it with folks. Any advice for what to set their expectation on how to use the AI interview? Like, what sort of time frame, what sort of cadence, what sort of practice loop should they be doing with it, and how to get the most time?
I would say, like, if somebody's starting from scratch, start on LeetCode, right? Get to the point where you're crushing easies and, you can kind of do mediums. And I'd say at that point, probably move to an AI interviewer and start combining that with doing mock interviews with other people. I think that a week on LeetCode by yourself is probably equivalent to one interview with an excellent, well-calibrated, engaged professional interviewer. These interviews aren't cheap. You can, again, get a lot of the way there with a peer, not as well, but at least like do a few professional interviews sooner rather than later, because you're going to get that feedback. They're going to say, okay, spend a week, working through like these hash map problems. Spend like your week on this. You're strong on this. You're actually not going to see these kinds of, people are obsessed with dynamic programming and
I know, right?
not that much. Like, I think Meta is prohibited from asking them, if I remember correctly. Or people get obsessed with like red black trees, and it's like, you're never going to see that. So just like talking to an expert is good, but start with LeetCode. I'd say use our AI interviewer sooner rather than later, because it's going to give you a feel for what it's like for realsies without the pressure and without the financial investment, and then move to human on human mocks.
Yeah. And also, Aline, given your vast experience in the space, a very sort of threshold question for people is, I guess it kind of depends on geography, but the question is, should everybody be assuming that DSA is part of the interview process or not?
You should not assume that. I think that it's not always the case for two reasons. One is smaller companies often don't do that, and for good reason. And it's a shame when very small startups blindly copy what the FANGs do, expecting the same results. It's a cargo cult. But I think clever smaller companies will maybe do a little bit of algorithmic stuff, and then most of the interview will be not that. So that goes back to like, just ask what to expect, and they will tell you. If you do interview with large top tier companies, you should still expect a good amount of data structures and algorithms questions. But with the advent of cheating tools, I think companies are moving away from maybe not the format, but they're moving away from asking questions verbatim from, some popular question list on LeetCode. And I think that's actually a very good thing.
Yeah, 100%. I think the more sort of higher up the totem pole, the tech companies, the more the more internal effort goes into not recycling questions. Like at Google, there was, lists and lists of questions we couldn't ask because they'd be leaked, not, stuff like that. Like it was very much, people were coming up with questions on the fly pretty much every month, just to say, we can ask it this way, we can ask it this way, just to add the variance. And that sort of, it's the competitive arms race between the knowledge that leaks out into the world and the, the hiring bar they need to have. Now, one last thing for you before I let you go, because I've taken up quite a bit of time, is...
Actually, before we do the last thing, there's one thing I forgot to say that I think is important. We talked a lot about DSNA questions, but that's generally the phone screen and a small part of the onsite, right? A lot of the onsite is system design and behavioral questions. And those, unless you perform really poorly on them, then you won't get an offer. But if you perform okay, they're not going to be used to determine if you get an offer. They're going to be used for leveling. And there's so much down leveling happening. So like, I would just make sure to budget time in your prep for system design. But I'd say like, do your DSNA prep, bundle all your phone screens together, then tell the company, I need time to prep. Then you practice for the onsite, and then you do the onsite. And the onsite is going to be sys design. And, behavioral needs less practice, but you got to have good stories. We have all the, like, we've seen the gamut of, people preparing, and most people just prepare DSA, and then they're blindsided by some of the other things.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So I'll just put this link up here as well. That when I was preparing for FANG, I wrote basically all my study notes in detail into a system design book. And I swear it was because of this that Google said, we need another round with you to level you. Exactly as you said, Aline. Just because Shirley knows what she's talking about. They did another round to level me and bump me up a level based on my system design performance, right? Because I've done this sort of intense handbook for myself, and then I publish it. And that's just to go, folks, don't over-index on just the DSA stuff. Like I've said this publicly, I did not actually finish my DSA portion in the 45 minutes I was given for Google. I didn't finish it. I came close, but the interview and I spent a lot of time talking about edge cases and possible ways to sort of solve this problem. And I think that's the signal my interviewer was looking for, was I don't care if this person completes it. What I care is, does this person know enough to intelligently approach the problem and evaluate it?
You had a good interviewer.
I had a great. I've often said that, and so much of this is luck. Like, I had a great mother. I had a great education. On the day that I went to Google, other people who would kick my butt weren't there. They didn't show up for the interview. I had a great interview. Like, so much luck stacks up into this, right? Like, that's just like, so, but what can you do? So yeah. So tell us about Beyond Cracking, the coding interview, your involvement in the project, what prompted that, and why it's now timely.
Would love to. So CTCI is a classic, but it's increasingly outdated. I think when it first came out, having that list of problems and solutions was revolutionary. Completely revolutionary. As I got to know Gail on working on this project, she's like, yeah, I wrote this PDF, and then it just like took off. And I was like, what? So unfortunately, for today's market, we need more. Maybe fortunately for us, because we got to write a great book. But I think there are a few things that are different. One is, it's not enough to just apply to companies anymore. It's so much more competitive. You have to know not only how to get in the door at companies, but how to actually manage your job search. How do you time prep? How much solo practice do you do? How do you time outreach to companies with actually doing your prep? How do you think about negotiation? And negotiation actually starts before you ever have a recruiter conversation. It's not just the stuff at the end. All of these things are so much more important because the market is much more competitive. So the part of the book that I wrote was kind of what we call the squishy stuff. So it's the first 160 pages, and it's everything. We actually have 9 chapters.
I was going to say that. Yeah, I did go through that. Yeah.
And they include 7 of my chapters and then 2 technical chapters, which are sliding windows and binary search. Hopefully that's the correct link. Let's check. Yes. Okay. So that one reason was just like, hey, let's put people in the driver's seat of their job search, and let's teach them like what companies are actually thinking and how to manage it. The other reason is my co-authors were really passionate about teaching people to think instead of memorizing. And that was the main thrust of the book. It's really, even with the non-technical chapters, it's teaching people how to critically think about interview processes and hiring, and then also teach them how to critically think about data structures and algorithms. It's a long ass book. I think it's like 640 pages, if I'm not mistaken, but I think it is the best in-depth resource on data structures and algorithms, interviews, and managing a technical job search. It doesn't have system design in it. Maybe we'll do a follow-up book on that, but we wanted to write it because the original just wasn't cutting it in this tough market.
Yeah, 100%. And what's your view on the ability to update books fast enough to reflect the market? How do you feel about that?
Well, one interesting thing that I learned in the process of writing this book is you can actually, Amazon is our printer, publisher, whatever, right? And you can update, you can make small changes to the book. Like, so as people have started reporting bugs, we've been able to make changes in real time to the PDF. And then as new, they print it just in time. So of course, the bigger stuff, I think you put out follow-up editions. one of the questions we get a lot is, well, is everything going to be out of date because AI is completely going to change interview processes? I don't think so. I think that learning how things work under the hood is going to be more important now than ever before because AI advances.
Yeah. No, and I share the same view. So either we both right or we both wrong, but I share the same view that it's there are certain fundamentals and meta principles that have more to do with economics and that explain the job search process.
It's all market forces. It's all market forces, right?
Correct. Exactly what I tell people. This is a market dynamic. This is not a technical thing. This is not this is pure market dynamic. And exactly as you said, it's sales. It's sales for both sides. Like both sides are selling in an interview. And this is why I keep telling my students, I said, you have to think of this as you're a startup in a competitive market. You're launching yourself as a product and they have alternatives. This is a market dynamic at play, right? This is pure market dynamic and you have to market yourself the right way. And so, so great that CTCI has got that update because the squishy stuff is absolutely critical because too many people dive into action and busy work without laying out the plan. And it kind of doesn't matter if you're directionally wrong. No matter how much work you do, if you're heading south when you need to head east, you're not going to get there. It doesn't matter how fast you run, right? So fantastic. Really, yeah.
Maybe the last thing I'll say about it too is we have the book has, I think, 230 or 250 problems in it. None of them are in the original CTCI. Maybe there are a few classics in there like Anne Queen's, but they're all original problems just for this book. And the really cool thing is that we've opened it up so without buying the book, anybody can get all the problems in the book and the solutions just by logging into Interviewing.io. And of course, you can work them all with our AI interviewer. And there are like another 50 secret problems that AI interviewer has that the book does not.
That's fantastic. See, this is actually freely accessible now?
Yes. So if you go to the second URL I linked you to, bctci.co/problems, yeah, you have to make an account, but then you can access all the supplemental materials for the book and all the problems and solutions that are in the book as well.
Wow.
Isn't that sick?
Okay, sorry. I think I accidentally pasted it back to you instead of putting it as a back end. Wow. That's fantastic.
There it is. Yeah, I'm so proud of the work we did here and I hope people find it valuable. All the problems and solutions in the book. And
I've got to say, yes, at one level it's harder to, the market's different, it's more competitive. True. But look at the kind of tooling we have now compared to even 7 years ago when I was starting out. Like it's just the opportunity and the problems grow together. It's fantastic. I get excited about stuff because I'm like, for every problem, there's a newer, better solution now. And this is clearly tremendous. It's tremendous. So well done.
Thank you. Thanks. It was awesome to work on this, and I'm so excited that people seem to like it so far.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I'm really impressed that folks can actually get access to the problems. There are a new class of problems. There's more meta principles involved. The AI interviewer now helps you actually interact with them rather than just reading them or typing them out. Like it is a completely different rehearsal. I keep thinking about how in the 50s, sports people used to be just physically fit, work out a little bit, do their sport and go back. And now they're doing blood work and they're doing nutrition and they calibrating everything. Like everything's changed. The sport is more competitive. Excellence is higher today.
A really good analogy. Yeah, absolutely.
And you need to calibrate across the process, which is, why Brian and I spent 12 months of people calibrating how they think, because thinking is really important. The wrong thinking with the right effort will still produce the wrong results, sometimes. So, it's unlikely you'll do the right effort with the wrong thinking anyway. But we have to calibrate everything, their mindset, their moods about things, their expectations about the things, their time audits, like how are they using time? Most people are so surprised by how poorly they end up, using time. And they're already busy with kids and family, Like you have to calibrate all those things and then you have to do the right things at the right time in the right order to the right degree so that you then can compete. Like there is so much calibration involved and people don't realize it, So it's great. I'm so excited about this. You may actually have been the first person in the last 7 years to tempt me to get back to doing some of these problems. Aline, I never thought I'd say that. But
let us know how it goes.
I will. Well, thank you so much for your time. You've been so generous with it. And most importantly, thank you for all the work you've done in the last 8 years. I personally have benefited from that a lot. So this is a personal thank you, but also on behalf of the audience, thank you for this because those who are lucky enough to learn this, and I mean this genuinely, will have an edge simply because it'll fix some of the incorrect expectations, assumptions that are so dangerous and so lethal to so many people's plans. Because what you don't know, what you don't know, you don't know is likely going to trip you up much more. And now you know that a little bit. So thank you, Aline. Thank you for your time and thank you for this work. I'm really excited for what happens in Beyond CTCI too.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for joining the show, and I'll see you next time.
All right. See.
Do it. Just subscribe. You know you got to do it.